Hi everyone, my name is Amber, welcome back to my channel. This is a video on my best and worst books of 2022. I have a lot of books to talk about because I gave 16 books 5 stars and I have 8 worst books of the year, which aren't necessarily 1 star, some of them are 2 stars, and I think I've got a couple of DNFs in there as well, but they were pretty bad, so that's why they're on this list. I'm going to start off with the best books of the year and then do the worst books at the end. I will leave timestamps down below if you want to skip straight to the worst books. I just thought I'd do it in one video because I couldn't be bothered to make 2, and also I have so many videos going up in January, guys, and I don't have time. Well, there's no space in my uploading calendar, so yeah, we might as well get started. These best books, by the way, aren't in any particular order. I listed them in the order that I read them because I figured that was the easiest way. I didn't really want to figure out which the best of the best was or were, just because I wanted to talk about all of these. So here we go. The first book I want to mention is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is the first Octavia E. Butler book that I have ever read. I got it from the library right at the beginning of the year and I gave it 5 stars. This is a story of a black woman from, I think, the 70s, because that's when it was written, and she travels back in time because her ancestor, who is the white son of a white slave owner, kind of calls her back using, I don't know, special powers or something. And obviously, as she is a black woman, is not treated very well, and she is very, very worried about being back there. I can't remember the exact date, I think it was pre-Civil War, but the main character kept going back throughout different points in this guy's life. She went through a lot of stuff, and I found this book very powerful, very intriguing, because again, have I said that in this video? I really like time travel stuff, so it was very, very interesting to see her go back from the 70s to, I think, the 1800s, and we could see what things were different and what things were still the same. It was such a good book, and I've only read 2 books by her, this author, so far, and this is my favourite one. The next one I want to talk about is actually a reread. I do have a couple of rereads on this list because I loved them and went back to them, and that's why they're favourites of the year. This one is The Toll by Neil Shusterman. It's the 3rd book in the Arthur Scythe series. This series is one that you've probably heard of. It's YA dystopian sci-fi set in a world where no one really dies because humans have kind of beaten death. But that does mean that the earth is starting to become overpopulated, and so there are scythes who are basically grim reapers, and they go around killing people whichever way they see fit, and they're completely ungoverned. They govern themselves, or try to. And in the first book there are 2 main characters who are going to be trained to become scythes. They start when they're teenagers, and we get to know all of the inner workings of the scythedom, and we learn about this thing called the Thunderhead, which is basically like an AI god sort of thing, and it's so interesting. And I gave The Toll 5 stars. I love the way that the series ends, and I love the expansion of the world and the introduction of new characters, and it's just a really good book. Another reread I had was Daisy Jones and the Six. This is by Taylor Jenkins Reid. You've probably all heard of it. It's set in, I think, the 70s or 80s, and it's about a rock band called the Six and a woman called Daisy Jones who is a singer, and she teams up with the Six and they all become very successful. There's also a romance sort of tension between Daisy and the main band member Billy. It's all told in interview style format. I listened to it as an audiobook both times I've read this, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's a full cast narration. It's absolutely brilliant. Cheryl from Archer is one of the narrators. Absolutely spot on, and it's also being turned into a TV show, which I think is coming out this year. I also gave 5 stars to a very short book called Empress and Anaya. This is by the author of Queenie. It's a short YA story. The main characters are best friends. Empress isn't from the most well-off background, and her best friend Anaya is. So there's a lot of tension between the 2 of them, mainly from Empress, I would say, but Anaya also doesn't really understand Empress all that well, and vice versa. It was a really good book. I listened to this on audio and I loved it. There's not really much I can say about it because it is so short, but I would recommend picking it up. I also gave 5 stars to Know My Name. This is a memoir by Chanel Miller, and she talks about her experience of taking a assaulter rapist to court, and the media frenzy that happened surrounding it, and the treatment of her versus the rapist. I don't really want to go into too much detail in case this is really triggering, but I would recommend looking this up. I would also recommend listening to it as an audiobook if you can, because she narrates it herself and it's very good. Another non-fiction book that I really enjoyed was The Good Immigrant. This is a collection of essays by, I think, about 21 people. This paragraph of the synopsis explains it better than I could. It says, it brings together 21 exciting Black, Asian, minority ethnic voices emerging in Britain today. It explores why immigrants come to the UK, why they stay, and what it means to be other in a country that doesn't seem to want you and doesn't truly accept you, however many generations you've been here, and still needs you for for its diversity monitoring forms. I really enjoyed this one. Some of the essays or short stories were better than others, but overall an absolutely incredible book, and I gave it 5 stars. I gave all of these 5 stars obviously, so I'm going to stop saying that now. The next one is The River of Silver. This is the collection of short stories set in the Daevabad Worlds trilogy. It's set before, during and after, so it does spoil the events of the Daevabad series. I love this one. I don't really have loads to say about it. It's set in a fantasy world full of like jinn and magic and various other mythological creatures. It's honestly incredible. It's one of my all-time favourite series, if not the best series I've ever read, so I'd recommend picking it up after you've read the series. I also read and loved Dead Silence. This is a sci-fi horror book. It's kind of pitched as Titanic in space. In this one, the main character is on a mechanical team. I think they fix like satellites or something, or communications devices, and then they come across an abandoned ship that went missing years and years ago, and they decide that they can probably claim it, to be honest, and make a load of money from it. So they enter the ship and then everything starts to go wrong. That's all I'm going to say. The atmosphere and the setting of this one was absolutely incredible, and I'd highly recommend it. I can't wait for this author to come out with another book, hopefully set in a similar sort of setting. I also listened to a short story called Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin. I don't want to talk too much about it because it's a very short story, and I listened to it on audio, but you can get it as an ebook. This is a futuristic sci-fi novella. Again, I don't really know how much to say about this because it's going to give so much away, but it's about a person who returns to Earth after humans have left it, or so they thought, and then he comes across a group of people there. And that's all I'm going to say. It's N.K. Jemisin, it's very thematic, and I really enjoyed it. Another one that I loved was Trial by Fire. This one is non-fiction. It's about the station house fire, which is something that I've been fascinated with since I accidentally stumbled across the video on YouTube about a decade ago. It was an absolutely tragic event. I'm only laughing because I was a very young person when I stumbled across this, and I probably shouldn't have watched the video, to be honest, because it has traumatized me. But basically this video on YouTube shows the fire as it starts, and then as everyone is trying to exit the building, and the building wasn't up to code. It didn't follow any fire safety regulations, and people were blocked from going out of the fire exits. And this book goes into the trials that happened afterwards in the aftermath of the disaster. I would highly recommend reading up on this event because it gave me such a great awareness of my surroundings when I'm out in public and when I'm in public buildings or small confined spaces. It's just really important, I think, and I wouldn't recommend watching the video, to be honest, because it is tragic and you do see people dying and it will stick with you. I would recommend reading up on the story anyway. I think this book also did a really good job of acknowledging the victims of the fire as well, and of the poor regulations and policy that wasn't followed. So I'd highly recommend it if you're into that kind of thing, which I am. Then there's a thriller book which I very rarely give 5 stars actually, and that is The Last to Vanish by Megan Miranda. This one is set on the Appalachian Trail. There's a small town there where hikers go, and over the years a lot of hikers have gone missing in different events. It's not necessarily linked, although it might be. I loved this one for the atmosphere. That's why I gave this one 5 stars. The story and plot and twists and stuff were just, they were alright, like they were good, but the atmosphere of this small, rainy, gloomy town on the trail was brilliant. And because I'm a hiker, like, do I call myself that? I enjoy walking and hiking and mountain climbing. I really appreciated the setting of this one. I also wanted to mention 2 books by the same author, and that is The Last Bear and The Lost Whale. These are middle grade books and they're absolutely stunning. So they do have pictures in them. First one, I'm sorry if you can hear Quill cooking downstairs. First one is about a girl who goes to an island off the coast of Norway because her dad is going to be a weatherman there, and she's very isolated and she comes across a polar bear that shouldn't really be on the island. And then in the second one, The Lost Whale, it follows a boy whose mother is going through a lot of mental health stuff. So he is sent to the US to live with his grandmother. He becomes fascinated by whale migrations, and then there's this one whale that is going from north to south along the coast, and she hasn't been seen in a while, so he wants to know where she is. There are kind of magical elements to both of them, but really it's mainly about like climate change, environmentalism, mental health. It's really wholesome, and it also deals with grief quite a lot as well in both of these books. I also want to mention Homegoing by Yagi. Again, this is a reread for this year. I adored this one. It's a generational story. It starts in, I think, the 17 or 1800s in what is now Ghana, and there are 2 sisters who don't know the other exists. brothers, and one marries a white man who lives in this country now, and the other is enslaved and taken over to the US. It alternates between their descendants, and each chapter follows a new descendant of theirs. It's so interesting and heartfelt and emotional, and there are so many ways I could describe this book, but I lack the vocabulary. I would highly recommend it if you like historical and literary fiction. It's absolutely incredible, and I'm probably going to reread it in 2023 as well. I also gave 5 stars to Killjoy by Holly Jackson, which is the short story prologue to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I don't think this is out in the US because it came out here for World Book Day, but it's basically a very short story about Pip discovering her love for investigating and true crime, and I had to give it 5 stars because I love Pip and I love Holly Jackson's writing. The last 5-star and best book of the year I have is Notes on an Execution. It's one that I finished a couple of days ago as I'm recording this. This tells the story of the women who have been affected by a serial killer. It's fiction. It starts off showing the point of view of the serial killer but told in second person format, and then it sort of alternates and we go back right to the start where the serial killer is born before he became a serial killer, and we follow his mother, birth mother, and what happened to her and how she raised him up to a point. And then there are several other women who are involved as well at various points throughout his life. It really spoke to me. I don't really know why. I thought it was really good, and I should probably also mention that this serial killer is a prisoner on death row, so if you think you'll find that difficult to read about, then maybe don't pick this book up, but it is really good and I would highly recommend reading it. Okay, now we're on to the worst books of the year. I only have 8 to talk about, and there's not really loads to say about a couple of them, so I can just kind of whiz through because I feel like this video has been going on forever. First of all, we have Generation Dead, which is an old school YA book. I gave this one 1 star. It's my first 1 star of the year. I really didn't like it. I thought the author was trying to do things that he didn't really know how to tackle, such as racism as an example. I'm fairly sure he's a white guy, and it was just very surface level, and I don't know, maybe it would have worked back in 2009 or whenever this came out, but I don't think it really works reading it in 2022. So yeah, didn't love it. It's a zombie story about zombie romance in high school. Wasn't very good at all. Then I have Iron Widow. I did not like this book. I gave it 2 stars, and I think that was me being generous. So this was kind of pitched as a really feminist, angry story. It was, but that's pretty much all there was to it. The plot and the world building felt very lazy, and I didn't really get much out of it. I also didn't like the main character. I don't think she was meant to be likeable, but I was meant to still, you know, enjoy reading about her. Otherwise, what's the point? And I didn't. So yeah, gave that one 2 stars. I gave 1 star to The Thursday Murder Club. This book was shit. It's a really badly written mystery book about quirky old people living in a quirky old people's home or retirement village. A lot of them had a load of money, and they were trying to get involved in a mystery that didn't really have loads to do with them, if I'm being honest. Some people call this charming, but I very much disagree. I don't think it was at all, and I definitely will not be reading the rest of the series. Then there's White Sand Volume 3, which is a Brandon Sanderson book, and this was also terrible. So I feel like it really lost its way. It's the 3rd volume, obviously, in a series. The first 1 and 2 I actually quite enjoyed. The art style in this one changed, and not only that, but the writing was just very like meh. I thought the Brandon Sanderson just kind of dropped the ball on this one, so I didn't enjoy it. I don't really have much to say about it. Then we have Ariadne, which is a very popular book. It's a Greek mythology retelling. It's meant to be feminist. Ariadne, the main character, gets stuck on an island and gives birth a few times, I think, maybe just once. And that's pretty much her entire role in the book. And then it also follows her sister, who's a little bit more interesting, but then at the end something happens and it kind of erases all of the progression that her character had, and the whole thing just seemed really pointless. So I don't want to read Jennifer Saint's other books because this one was honestly terrible. There's also The Black Prison, which I gave 2 stars. This is the first book in the Lightbringer series, and it was atrocious. It was so badly written. The main characters were mainly men who I really hated or didn't care for. They had no personality other than being like edgelords or something. I don't know. It wasn't good, and I didn't like the descriptions of the magical system either. I didn't think it was very well explained, and I've read recaps of the other books in the series and I don't think it gets any better, so I'm glad I'm stopping there. I also gave 1 star to The Only Good Indians, and I'm really sorry. The idea and the concept was great. I was interested in the characters, but the execution was awful. It follows a group of friends who killed an elk back in the day, and then they're being haunted separately by this elk, and they sort of die off or get picked on one by one. And I thought the pacing was just all over the place. It didn't give an even look at each character. The first one was killed in sort of like a prologue sort of thing, and then the second character, his stuff went on forever. And then there was a weird basketball scene, which yeah, I kind of skimmed through because it was so odd. I really didn't like this one, and I'm really hesitant to try out his other books, but I might give it a go anyway. I was going to do a reading project on his books, but because I only gave this one 1 star, I completely scrapped that. But let me know if you have read this book and whether his other books are better, because I would like to keep trying to read his books if there's some promise there. And then finally, thankfully, because I'm losing my voice, I have The Girl from Widow Hills, which is a Megan Miranda book. I will talk about it more in my Megan Miranda project video that's coming up soon-ish, in a couple of weeks. I've just got 2 more books to read. I gave this one 1 star and it was terrible, and I'll talk about why in that video. Those were my best and worst books of 2022. Honestly, it was a pretty incredible year. For reading, I think my average was like 3.5 or something, maybe a bit higher. I will be doing a stats video at some point. I just don't know when I'm going to be able to fit it in with my reading and uploading calendar, but that should be coming at some point soon. Like I said, I had a really good year. Let me know how many 5-star reads you had in 2022, how many 1-star reads. That will also be quite amusing. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I'll speak to you all in the next one. Bye.